Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is May the 4th. We're getting ready for Parshas Kedoshim. Today is also Yom HaZikaron. In Israel, today is Memorial Day, when all the brave men and women who have fallen over the years in defense of Israel and our brothers and sisters who live in Israel, when they are remembered and they're being thought of and their families are being thought of. So we're going to dedicate our learning today for all of those who have fallen in defense of Israel, as well as defense of our brothers and sisters who live there. We're going to start today talking about something about Yom HaZikaron, and then something about Yom HaAtzmaut for Israel's Independence Day, which begins tonight, goes into tomorrow. So I want to share with you, there are so many soldiers, there are so many Jewish boys and girls who have fallen over the years in defense of Israel and its citizens. I want to share with you a little bit about somebody this morning that Leila and I had the privilege of getting to know his family. This was a young man by the name of Michael Levin. We never had a chance to know Michael when he was living. However, we did have a chance to know his older sister. His older sister married a boy in our community when we lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So we got to know the Levin family through him. And I remember we got to know the parents. We met them at this wedding. And each year I try to reach out to the parents in the summer when it's close to the yahrzeit of their son, Michael. So just some brief information about Michael. Michael was born in 1984. He was killed in action in 2006 in southern Lebanon. So here's something, and what his parents did to memorialize him and as a real zechus for his neshama is that they created a lone soldier center in Israel. And it actually has a couple of branches, I believe, at this point in his memory. Michael was a young man. He was away from his family when he was serving in the IDF. And his parents wanted to make it easier for other lone soldiers that didn't have family in Israel, that they should have a place to go when they had time off, when they, and to recharge their batteries. So they started these lone soldier centers. So let's read a little bit about Michael. Michael Levin made Aliyah from Philadelphia in 2002 and joined the paratroopers. In the summer of 2006, Michael was given leave to visit his family in the U.S. 2 weeks into his trip, the war broke out on Israel's northern border when Hezbollah ambushed an IDF patrol, killing 5 reservists and kidnapping Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Regev while wounded. When Israel crossed the border in an attempt to rescue them, Hezbollah began its assault on Israel, launching thousands of rockets at the communities of northern Israel. Michael immediately cut short his vacation. He was in America with his family, and he flew back to Israel to serve with his unit. He fought to receive permission to be sent up to the north to rejoin his unit. When Michael arrived, his unit was sent to the Hezbollah village of Eta al-Sha'ab. It was to this Hezbollah stronghold that Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Regev had been taken 2 weeks earlier. On Tuesday, August 1st, Michael's unit moved forward and began an intense firefight with Hezbollah forces inside the village of Eta al-Sha'ab. Michael Levin was 22 years old when he fell fighting for the country he loved. That was 16 years ago. He would be 38 now. His memory and courage live on in thousands of lone soldiers who continued down the path Michael set, to make Aliyah, to serve in the IDF, and to build a life in the land of Israel. Next time Leila and I are in Israel, I really want to go to Har Herzl, and we want to stop by his kever. We want to visit. It's become almost a pilgrimage spot for so many American college-age students when they're on their birthright trips. One of the places that they take them when they visit Yerushalayim is to Har Herzl. That's the sort of like the equivalent of Arlington National Cemetery, where there's many fallen military soldiers who are there, as well as Israel's leaders. And it's become a real stop, and people speak about Michael. It's really become a destination. It's something that Leila and I want to go and pay our respects next time we're there. I want to share with you a brief video. I have the link there, and I'm hoping that that this will work in terms of sharing. So I'm going to share this. It's a 6-minute video about Michael. In honor of Yom HaZikaron, we'll learn a little bit about Michael. So I'm going to go to stop share, and then give me 1 second. I'm going to bring that up. And I go here. This should work for everyone. Please Let me know if it's not.
As a mother, blessing territory. It's just a normal kid. The only difference is
Okay, all right, I'm gonna get back the other sheet. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna go back to share screen. All right, so that was something I wanted to share about Michael Levine. His neshama should have an aliyah together with everybody else, with all the other brave young men and women who gave so much so there can be in Israel, and that all of our brothers and sisters who live in Israel could have a degree of safety in their life. Hashem should remember each and every one of their precious neshamos. They should all have an aliyah. I want to continue sharing with something with you, and that's because tomorrow, the way it's structured is that today is Yom HaZikaron, it's Israel's Memorial Day, where they remember those who fell, and it immediately is followed by Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. So I want to share with you, there's a very famous Rashi. In fact, it's the very first Rashi in the Chumash. And I want to share this with you because I saw something this year on it that I hadn't seen before. So the very first pasuk in the Chumash says, "Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'aretz." In the beginning, God created all the heavens and the earth. So there's a very famous Rashi here. It's a quote, and Rashi says, "Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak taught, there were opinions out there that felt it would have made a lot more sense for the Torah really to skip all of Sefer Bereshis. It's the story of our national narrative, our history, but there's no halachas that it's teaching us. We could have started the Torah with the very first mitzvah that's given to Klal Yisrael, which is HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem in Parshas Bo in Sefer Shemos. So there were opinions that question, why is it that Hashem started in Sefer Bereshis, the story of creation? Perhaps it would have made more sense to have begun the Torah in Parshas Bo with HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. That's the first mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people. Matam Pasach beBereshis. So why did God start the Torah with Sefer Bereshis? So he says as follows, Mishum, because there's a pasuk in Tehillim that states, Koach Masav Higid Lamo Lases Lehem Nachlas Goyim. The pasuk says as follows, the strength of his works he related to his people, to give them the inheritance of nations. What does that mean? Shem Yomru Umos Ha'olam LiYisrael. If the nations of the world would ever say to the Jewish people, Listem atem, you're a bunch of thieves. Shekavashtem Artzos Shiva Goyim. That you came in to the land of Canaan and you stole this land that had been inhabited by 7 nations. Heim Omrim Lahem. So what is the Jewish response if the world accuses us of usurping a native people and taking over the land of Canaan? What's our response? Heim Omrim, what we're supposed to respond is as follows. Kol Aretz Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The entire world belongs to our Creator. We just read in Parshas Bereshis the story of creation. God created our world. Hu bara, He created our whole cosmos. The Nasnal Asher Yashar Be'einav. And God, since He was a creator, He has the rights to apportion it and to give out sections of the land of the world to whoever it makes the most sense in His eyes. Ritzono nasna lahem. Initially, he gave it to them, meaning the seven nations who had lived in Canaan initially. Uvirtzono, and with God's will, not lamem, he took it away from them, the nasna lanu, and gave it to the Jewish people, gave it to the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's the very first Rashi on Chumash. And it sounds almost prophetic, because here is Rashi telling us that there's going to come a time, there will come a time in our world where the nations of the world will accuse us of being thieves. And here's a response. I once heard someone say something beautiful on this Rashi. Rashi is living in the Middle Ages. Rashi is living in the 1200s. And someone may have looked at Rashi, his Talmidim, as he's saying this over, and said, are you out of your mind? You're living in France. Are you out of your mind? Someone's going to ever ask, we're a defeated, conquered people. The Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed for almost 1,200 years. And you're writing in your commentary to Chumash, you're writing this idea that there may come a time when the world will accuse us of having been thieves. What does that mean? Who would ever think of such a thing? Yet here's Rashi is recording this, and he's saying that no, this is information that's pertinent for us to all know. And who would have ever imagined that we would be living in a time where we're actually witnessing this, where number one, that there are people accusing the Jewish people of having stolen a land. And here it was Rashi, so to say, foreseeing this and talking about Chazal foreseeing this. No one ever would have imagined that. That's just absolutely wild. That's point number one. Point number two is, what does this Rashi mean? What does Rashi really mean here? So let me share something with you that I saw this year, a beautiful commentary by the Levush. The Levush is one of the commentaries on Rashi. It was written by Rav Mordechai Yaffe, who was a contemporary of the Ramah, the great Rav Moshe Isserles, living in the 1500s in Poland. So I saw him brought down in a beautiful article on Esha Torah's website. I looked it up in the original, and I want to share it with you the way this Rabbi Yonasan Geffen, how he speaks it over, but I can vouch for it. I looked up the Levush. It's 100% true what he's writing. So he quotes our Rashi. That first paragraph is quoting our Rashi. Rashi opens his monumental commentary on the Torah, quoting Rabbi Yitzchak, who tells us that the Torah should have begun with the first mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, and it only opened with the story of creation and the subsequent events in order to teach us that the Jewish people have a God-given right to the land of Israel. The commentators ask why this point is so significant, to the extent that the order of the Torah is drastically changed because of it. So many of them are Farshim on Rashi. They ask that question. Okay, that is nice. That is a very nice point. That yes, there could be people who accuse us of being thieves. So now we have, the Torah starts here, so we have an answer for them. Shkoach. Many of the commentators say, is that so important? Is that so significant? If it would have made more sense for the Torah to start in Parshas Bo with the first mitzvah, so why didn't we do that? Just so we could start with this? What does that mean? So there are many different answers. Look at the Levush. The Levush Ha'ora, again, that's written by Rav Mordechai Yaffe in the 1500s, contemporary of the Ramah, the great Rav Moshe Isserles. He answers, the Levush Ha'ora answers, that if it is true that the Jewish people stole the land of Eretz Yisrael, then the whole Torah is undermined. Because in the Torah, there are mitzvahs prohibiting stealing and of encroaching on the property of another person. That's called Hasagat Gevul. Accordingly, the nations of the world will say that the Jews who claim to follow the Torah do not keep to its commands because they stole the land from the 7 Canaanite nations. And if the Jewish people will answer that God allowed them to steal it from the nations, then that is even more problematic, as it demonstrates that even God himself does not, so to speak, observe his own commandments, such as do not steal and Hasagat Gevul. This would cause a great Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name, and undermine the whole message of the Torah. Rabbi Yitzchak therefore explains that the Torah addresses this argument, saying that there is no thievery here at all, as God created the whole world and he determines who owns which land. It was his will that the nations have it at first, and it was his decision to take it from them and give it to the Jewish people. It's not just that God decided, okay, you're allowed to steal it. If God says you're allowed to steal it, that means God doesn't care about stealing. That's not what happened. Rabbi Yitzchak explaining as follows, is that God gave it to them initially, but never for keeps. God could decide who's allowed to have it. He could give it and he could take it away. He gave it to them, he took it away, and he gave it to Bnei Yisrael. The Levush Ha'ora teaches us a fundamental lesson with this explanation. Chilul Hashem is so serious that it's necessary to alter the nature of the Torah in order to avoid this possibility. Meaning, what's the Levush saying? The Levush is saying the Torah had to start with this. If the Torah didn't give us this information, if the Torah did not supply us with this information that there was a creator, and the creator decided that the 7 Canaanite nations could have it for a time being, and then take it away and then give it to Bnei Yisrael, there would be a real problem. There would be a potential Chilul Hashem. So the Torah, so to say, didn't start at HaChodesh Hazalachem, did not start with the first mitzvah, despite all the good reasons to have done so, in order to dispel this notion of that there shouldn't be a Chilul Hashem. So let's read that again. The Levush Orah teaches us a fundamental lesson with this explanation. Chilul Hashem is so serious that it's necessary to alter the nature of the Torah in order to avoid this possibility. This is because the whole purpose of creation is Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name, which is the antithesis of Chilul Hashem, of desecrating God's name. This is expressed in Pirkei Avos, where we read, everything that the Holy One, blessed be He, created in this world, He only created for His honor. The Mishnah is teaching us the purpose in our lives should be to elevate God in the eyes of the world. The exact opposite of this is Chilul Hashem, acting in such a way that causes people to see the Torah or the Creator in a negative light. That is why it is so important that the Torah immediately assert the God-given right of the Jewish people to own Eretz Yisrael. Thus, the Torah begins with a vital message for all of us. Just like God is extremely careful to be seen consistent with the Torah, so too we must be careful that our actions also be consistent with the mitzvos in the Torah. So this is a beautiful Rashi on so many levels, but the Rashi with this Levush has a whole new dimension to it. It's not just that the Torah is telling us, okay, we have a right to the land of Israel. And that's the very first Rashi that's in the Chumash. That's important. But what this Levush is explaining is it brings it another level of that importance. The Levush is explaining the significance. So why did the Torah include all this information? In order to prevent the Chilul Hashem. If there wasn't this information, if the world didn't have this information, that there's a creator and it's up to the creator to decide which nations get which countries, then people might have a complaint on us for having taken a land that wasn't deemed to be ours. But only when we have this information does that dissipate does that make that complaint dissipate, go away. And why is that? So he says again, what the Levush is saying is that without this information, there would have been a Chilul Hashem, because people would have accused us of not listening and not following the laws of the Torah that we claim to follow. That's why this information is here, in order to prevent that Chilul Hashem. So again, we see this idea of, number one, the God-given that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the land of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, to the Jewish people. But more so, this information has to be there to prevent the Chilul Hashem. Our whole purpose, what we want to accomplish in this life, is to be Mekadosh Shem Shemaim, to sanctify God's name, and not to Chas v'Shalom, not God forbid, do the opposite. But this raises a question, and the question really is, if it's so clear that God gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people, so clear, it's right here in the Chumash, and then later in Sefer Bereshis, God promises Avraham Avinu that He's going to give this to his descendants, and then it's very clear who the chain goes through. It goes through Yitzchak. It does not go through Yishmael, and then it goes through Yaakov. It does not go through Esav. This is all very clear. And if that's the case, why is there any contention that's out there? Why is there any doubt about the Jewish people having a right to the land of Israel? There's so many people in this world who are serious about their religion, and their religious beliefs are based in the Torah, based in the Bible, in the Old Testament, as they call it. Anyone who claims to be a believing Christian, they believe in the Old Testament, and in the Old Testament, it's very clear that the land of Israel is part and parcel of the Jewish people. Muslims who base their foundation of the Quran is also based within the Torah. So again, why is there any doubt about any of this? How can we explain that? I want to share with you an incredible source. I've seen this in a couple places. I don't have the book where it was brought down originally, but it's quoted in many sources. They quote the book, and it's quoted almost verbatim. And I want to share with you a source. I found this by Moshe Feiglin. Moshe Feiglin's a politician. He's a member of Knesset in Israel, and he wrote this in the Jewish press. So let's see this article. It's called "The Pita That Revived Terror." It was written in 2012, 10 years ago. He was going on. It was going on the pasuk in the Chumash that says that all the nations will see the name of Hashem is called upon you and they will fear you. So let's see what he does with this. During the first Lebanon war, so that was in the 1980s, the IDF forced PLO terrorists all the way to the Beirut port and then to Tunisia. The PLO, which had lost its stronghold in Lebanon, was shattered. Salah Tamri, the most senior and admired terrorist captured by the IDF, was imprisoned in the Ansar detention camp. He was a broken man. Later, Tamri was interviewed by journalist Aaron Barnea for the book he would write about him, To Be Captive. That was the name of the book. In Barnea's book, Tamri describes the situation of the terror organization prior to Pesach 28 years ago. I concluded, said Tamri, that we had no chance to overpower Israel's financial and military prowess, and that we should make do with the crumbs that they would throw us and fold up all our flags. Basically, that's it. The war is over. We're never going to beat Israel. Just take whatever they want to give us. We'll carve out some tiny little Palestinian territory. And that's it. End the fighting. He was at that position. Tamri, an intellectual and patriot, willingly cooperated with his captors. The other prisoners understood from their admired commander that the end had come and that the war was lost. And then Tamri continued. A surprising event took place that turned everything upside down. My hands were holding the cold bars, and I was looking from inside my dark jail cell towards the hall when an Israeli guard was walking. I saw him from afar. He was walking slowly, holding something in his hand that he would constantly bring close to his mouth. He would bring it close and then distance it. He was close to my cell. I called out to him. I saw that he was eating a pita. He would bite, and chew. You are a Jew, I said to him. Why are you eating chametz on Pesach? Don't you know that it's forbidden for a Jew to eat chametz on this holiday? So look at this. The guard is getting a musar shmooze from this terrorist who's behind bars. I'm not committed to the things that happened to my people during the exodus from Egypt 3,000 years ago. I have no connection to it, said the Jewish prison guard. Tamri continued, I sat on the mattress in my cell and said to myself, a nation of people who do not have a connection with their past, who are willing to publicly desecrate the laws of their faith, is a nation that has cut off the roots from its land. We will be able to achieve our goals. On that night, my approach completely changed. I couldn't fall asleep. In all those hours of darkness, I replayed that scene with the Jewish prison guard. The next morning, I gathered the Palestinian leadership in the prison, all those who knew my opinion over the years. I told them about my experience and that the conclusion I had reached. I clarified to everyone that from that morning, we were embarking on a new course, a war for everything, not for a small percentage and not for crumbs that they would throw us. For opposing us was a nation that lacked the connection to its roots, a nation not interested in its past. Thus, its motivation was necessarily void of any will to struggle and fight. Since then, Tamri says that he has told his story to tens of thousands of people and has convinced all of them that the approach must be changed to this. The Palestinians must struggle without compromise. Tamri was elected to the Palestinian parliament and indeed convinced his friends, breathing new spirit into the war against Israel. The damage done by that pita eaten by the Israeli soldier on Pesach cannot be exaggerated. The question mark hovering over the right of the Jewish state to exist, and as a result, over its right to defend itself in the face of an existential threat, is directly connected to our identity as God's nation. When the nations of the world see that God's name is called upon us, when we know who we are, understand what we represent, and are at peace with our identity, the power of deterrence that the terrorist Tamri initially felt will be established. When we are not interested in God's name being called upon us, the nations can openly plan to destroy us with nuclear weapons or in any other way, and they will do so without fear. I think this is a very, very important article. Again, what he's doing is he's quoting from this terrorist. Here was one of the terrorists who breathed new life into the whole Palestinian terrorist organization. He was defeated. He was on the verge of giving up. He was on the verge of convincing everybody, all of his cohorts, all the Palestinian leadership, that there's no reason to continue fighting. Just take the crumbs they're throwing us, and that's it. Shalom al Yisrael. That's what he was ready to do, until he heard from that guard that this guard was denying any connection to the past. And a light bulb went off in this terrorist's head. And he said, if this is a people who has no connection to its past, then we can win. If they don't have a connection, then what makes them any more special than us? What makes them any more deserving to be here? And that's what inspired him to continue the fight, continue without compromise. And that's the message that all the Palestinians who continue to fight without compromise, he inspired them to do so. That one pita on Pesach caused an incredible amount of damage. Could you imagine what a cheshbon, what a accounting that guard's going to have to give up in Shemayim? Unbelievable. But there's such a powerful message behind this. Again, we look back at that first Rashi and we say it's so clear to us. Why doesn't every Jew see this so clearly? Why are Jews throughout Israel just not holding up a Tanakh and saying, you know why we deserve to be here? Because of Tanakh. This is our ancestral homeland. Well, there are a segment of Jews who are willing to do that, and those are the Jews who want to live an observant lifestyle. Those who don't want to hold up a Tanakh, because if they hold up a Tanakh, there's many other psukim in that Tanakh that's going to require them to observe Pesach, to observe Shabbos, to observe many other mitzvos. And that could be getting in the way of the lifestyle that they want to live. So in a sense, what they're trying to do is say that we have a connection here, but it's not that much of a connection. It's not based on Tanakh. We're not bringing perhaps our most solid proof, our most solid claim to the land. They're not calling upon that, because to call upon that is going to bring their own lives into question and their own decisions into question. So it's tragic, but to us who are committed to Torah and committed to mitzvahs, it makes so much sense. We just can't help but hope that all of Klal Yisrael, all of Israel, will sometimes see this, hopefully soon, because this could change everything. I want to share one more source with you. I saw this recently, and you'll see how this dovetails with this. This was from Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, and we'll read the piece, and the last words tell you the context, and that speaks volumes. So this is Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. He passed away in the 1980s. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky was one of the leading Lithuanian Russia yeshiva who made it to America. He made it here before the Holocaust, before World War II, and he played a vital role in helping rebuild and re-energize American Orthodoxy. So I have a sefer at home on one of my shelves. It's called Emes Liakov. Many of his works that were published after he died was called Emes Liakov. This one's on Pirkei Avos. And here's a footnote. I thought this was a powerful footnote. Look at this together. It's on page 136, footnote 131. The Mishnah had spoken about Midah Keneged Midah, about this idea that God deals with us measure for measure. So look what he says. Danu manhige hamedinos, lemi yesh lo azchus al kosel hamaravi. Many of the leaders of the world have taken on the cause of trying to decide and to determine who has rights to the Kotel. Imla Yehudim, does it really belong to the Jews and they're entitled to pray there? Ola Aravim, or to the Arabs? Et Mahat, this is astonishing. V'chilote Torah Shalema Shalanu, don't we have a complete Torah, a complete Tanakh? Kesicha Batala Shalahem, is our Torah, which has survived thousands of years and which the world recognizes and based so many religions on, do they just view it as being some kind of empty conversation? Masha, or in other words, do they equate it with the same empty conversation that the Arabs used to claim the Kotel? Masha Suso Shal Muhammad Haya Kashur Sham. They call it Al-Barak. What does Al-Barak mean? It has to do with the horse, the stallion, because they'll say that Muhammad had this vision, that he had this ride from Saudi Arabia to the farthest temple. He never says the word Jerusalem, but he says to the farthest temple in the world, and he tied his horse to the wall there. And they claim that's the Kotel. That's why they have rights to the Kotel and not the Jews. So he says this is astonishing. This conversation, this legend that made it into some of Islamic literature. This is of equal footing. This is of equal claim. We have a Tanakh, an entire Tanakh that talks about Eretz Yisrael being given to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. In Nevi'im, we read about how David HaMelech purchases Har HaBayis. Shlomo HaMelech builds the Bayis Rishon, the first Beis HaMikdash. We know how Ezra and Nehemiah come back to build the second Beis HaMikdash, and it's documented about Herod remodeled that second Beis HaMikdash. So what is going on here? There are many explicit psukim verses in Tanakh. We built this kotel. We built the Beis Hamikdash. We built the kotel. Lefi Divrei Chazal, Nekad Sham Yitzchak. According to our tradition, that's where the Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, took place on Har Abayis Avinu. Yitzchak Avinu, that's where he was bound. Yaakov Avinu, Lan Sham. That's where Yaakov Avinu slept and had that prophetic dream with the ladder. The David HaMelech Olav Shalom Kanes Hagoren the Kesef Malay. And David HaMelech, King David, purchased the threshing grounds that were here from the Yevusim, paying full top dollar. How do the nations of the world, the leaders of the world, just dismiss all these episodes that are in Tanakh as HaMesorah Shalahem Lefi Nuscha Achas? How do they just dismiss everything based on one version of this Islamic a tale about how Muhammad had this night journey with his horse? Vanirali. So the only way I could explain this is as follows. Hashem is dealing with us measure for measure. Since we, the Jewish people, since the Jewish people began to doubt the veracity and doubt the truthfulness of Tanakh and our Mesorah, God is showing us from heaven, even the nations of the world, that most of the nations of the world are machshiv. They do recognize the Tanakh. They have you go into any hotel room, you'll find your Gideon Bible there that's got the Old Testament in it. So they all recognize the Tanakh. Yet why is there any discussion or conversation who has more legitimate rights to the Kotel, to the Temple Mount, to Israel? So he says, if we are going to doubt the Tanakh, then they will also, even though they recognize Tanakh, they will have a hard time understanding what a simple cheder student on his first year of studying Torah knows. You ask any observant kid who's studying in yeshiva, and he'll know that, yeah, it says in Sefer Bereshis that God gave Eretz Yisrael to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. What's to talk about? But this is Mida Keneged Mida, he says. Maybe this is the only way to explain it. How could there be a conversation who's got more legitimate rights to the Temple Mount, to the Kotel, to Eretz Yisrael? How could that be? It's all there in Tanakh, it's in our Mesorah. Yeah, but once such huge segments of Klal Yisrael began casting aspersions on Tanakh, casting aspersions on Chumash, on Torah Misinai, on our Mesorah, so what do we expect? The nations of the world should honor it when we don't? How can we ask the nations of the world to honor our Mesorah, to honor our Tanakh, when Klal Yisrael doesn't? That's absurd. So he says, this is God. This is God's intervention. There's no other way to explain this other than to say this is from God, because it makes no sense. Now look at these last bolded words. I found this in the notes of our teacher, meaning the grandchildren are writing. They found this in Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky's notes, Mishnos Hei Taf Reish Tzadi, from the year of 1930. 1930 is right after the pogroms, the riots in Israel in 1929. We've spoken many times about the Hebron massacre, which occurred in 1929. The whole impetus of that massacre, the lie, the canard that it was all based on, was that the Jews were coming to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The same thing that happens generation after, it's going on now. That's what they're rioting and going nuts about now, is because they're whipping them up into a frenzy that the Jews are about to destroy the mosque. But what was going on in 1929? The same frenzy, but it also had to do with the fact the Jews, all they wanted to do was daven at the Kotel. And there was a huge tumult. They tried davening there on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the British beat them up. They tore down the Mechitza. They jailed people because the Arabs were going nuts about the Jews davening in the Kotel area. And that's what started the whole libel that they were coming to destroy Al-Aqsa. That's the context of when Rav Yaakov wrote this. And it's frightening to see how this just keeps to repeat itself, because that's what the Arabs always do when they want to whip their uneducated masses up into a frenzy. That's what they always say, that the Jews are about to storm the Temple Mount and destroy our mosques, so we have to defend the mosque. That's what they always say. They're still doing it now. That's why in the last weeks during Ramadan, they were going nuts up there and throwing rocks, everything. That's exactly what was happening all again. So here's Rav Yaakov, and I think what he's saying is so logical. So just to put this all into perspective. So we started this morning talking about Yom HaZikaron, that today is Israel's Memorial Day. We talked about Michael Levin, Olav Shalom. Michael was killed in Lebanon. The first incursion that the Jews had up in Lebanon was the first Lebanon War, and that's when that terrorist Tamri was captured and was sitting in an Israeli cell. And what was happening in that Israeli cell? He was ready to give up, throw in the towel. He says, there's no way we're going to win. But then what happened was it became very clear to him that a good segment of Israel severed themselves from the past. A good segment of Israel severed themselves and didn't find anything that rooted them to Tanakh, rooted them to Torah and mitzvahs. And once he saw that, he says, you know what? We could win. That's what emboldened him to go to restart the whole terrorist scheme that continues to play a role to this day. And what's going on is as follows, is that, yes, as we saw that first Rashi in Chumash is addressing the fact about whose land is it, and that it belongs to Bnei Yisrael, belongs to the Jewish people. And we could look to that and we could say, it's right there in the Chumash. But why aren't so many other Jews? Why aren't so many Israelis looking at this? Why aren't we saying to world leaders around the world, go to your hotel, a nightstand, take out your Gideon Bible and tell me who Israel belongs to? Why are we not saying that? The answer is we can say that because we have no shame in holding up our Tanakh, holding up the Chumash and saying, this is our right, this is our deed to the land. Unfortunately, there's a huge segment of Klal Yisrael that's not comfortable doing that because they've cut themselves off from the Torah. They've cut themselves off from Tanakh. And once they've done that, they're not going to hold it up and say, this is our deed to our land. And in a sense, that's the greatest disservice because that is the greatest document that would explain our cause. But because of the fact they don't want to commit their lives to Torah and mitzvahs, they're not willing to do that. And as a result of that, as what Rabbi Yaakov points out, the implications of that is we can't expect the world to do that. If we're not going to do that ourselves, if Klal Yisrael is not going to embrace the Torah, embrace Tanakh, embrace our Masorah ourselves, what are we thinking? That the world's going to do that when we're not? Of course that's not going to happen. We have to do that. And God willing, once we do that, once Bnei Yisrael, when Klal Yisrael, not just little pockets here and there, but as a group, as a nation, when we embrace the Torah, when we embrace Tanakh, and we're able to say, this is our deed to the land, this is our claim to everything. Once we do that, there's nothing more powerful than that. And then we'll be able to turn to the nations of the world and say, why aren't you recognizing our foundational documents as well? And they'll have to do so the same if they want to take their religious group seriously. If they want to take anything that seriously, they're going to have to do that too. But it's not realistic to expect that to happen until we do. So I want to end on a positive note. On a positive note is that we've been davening for so many years that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should take us back. And he should rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, and we should have a kibbutz galus, an ingathering of exiles. We're starting to experience that. We're starting to taste that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been so kind to us. 74 years ago, he gave us a glimpse of what that will look like, a taste of what that will be like, but we're not there yet. We want to be there. And what we all recognize is that the only way that this can happen, in the Torah itself, the Nevi'im tell us this, the only way that we can fully actualize and realize a true geula, a true redemption, and a complete sense return of safety in our land, so that we don't have to add any more young men and women to that list of those we remember on Yom HaZikaron. The only way we can truly have that vision that Yeshayahu Hanavi painted for us of nations beating their swords into plowshares is if we as a whole entity, return and recommit ourselves to Torah and mitzvahs, embrace it, and hold that up as our foundational document of how we're choosing to live our lives. That's when the true geula will fully materialize. We're getting a sniff, we're getting a smell, we're getting a taste, but it's a tease. We want so much more. And God willing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should enable us to be Meir es Einei Klal Yisrael, to enlighten the eyes of all of Klal Yisrael, not just select pockets here and there, that we should all embrace the Torah, all embrace Torah and mitzvos, and we should experience the Geula Shalema, the full redemption that for which we also eagerly await and daven for each and every day. So again, there won't have to be any added names to be commemorated on any Yom HaZikarons moving forward. May this be HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, and Sheibana Beis HaMikdash B'mehera B'yameinu. May the Beis HaMikdash be rebuilt speedily in our days.